The sun hung high over the desert like a nail hammered into the sky, unflinching and hot enough to cook a man's thoughts straight through his skull. The wind didn't blow, it shimmered. Dust clung to the world like old sorrow, swirling through the dead stillness of Main Street, Sakuro. It was the kind of day Jedediah Thornton had learned to endure without complaint. Life didn't give a damn about heat or grief. Jed stood beside his mare, Constance, tightening the leather bridle with fingers that had seen better years. 53, broad as a barn door, silent as a shadow, he looked like a man made from the land itself. His brown cowboy hat shaded deep-set eyes carved by decades of dust, loss, and silence. Then a tug, small, insistent. He looked down and saw her. A little girl, maybe 6, barefoot, dress torn near the hem, her feet raw and bloodied. Her hair was the color of dry wheat and tangled like tumbleweed, stuck to her cheeks with tears and sweat. Her pale blue dress, once delicate, now clung to her thin frame like a memory trying not to fade. She tilted her head up, voice no louder than a whisper. "Please, follow me home. Mama won't wake up." Jed blinked. Once, and just like that, 20 years fell away. He saw Sarah, his daughter. Same age, same blue eyes, same weight of the world in 2 small hands. He crouched, massive frame folding with the quiet grace of someone used to hiding his strength. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. "Amelia. Amelia Morrison." The name hit like a gut punch. Morrison. There weren't many families with that name out in these parts, but there was one man, Blackjack Morrison, an outlaw, Jed had chased 2 decades ago, a name that still echoed like gunfire across the territory. "Where's your home?" She pointed east, toward the sun-scorched hills beyond the dry riverbed. "Past the big rocks that look like sleeping giants. Follow the dry creek till it bends, then up the ridge." Jed hesitated. His pack sat ready. His life was simple now, quiet, predictable, no strings. But those eyes. He lifted her into the saddle like she weighed nothing and climbed up behind her, gathering the reins. They rode without speaking, the mare's hooves stirring dust ghosts across the brittle land. The girl leaned into his chest. He could feel her trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion, from having carried something far too heavy for far too long. When they reached the sleeping giants, 2 boulders casting long shadows across the cracked earth, Amelia pointed to a narrow trail. "Just up there. The house is near the cottonwood. The homestead was barely that. An adobe shack, walls flaking, door hanging off its hinges, chickens too skinny to bother with." But it wasn't the neglect that gripped Jed's heart. It was the silence. No birdsong, no clatter of pans, no voices. Amelia slid down before he could stop her and ran toward the doorway. "Mama!" she called. "Mama! I brought help!" Jed followed slowly, knowing what he'd find but not wanting to find it. The room smelled of heat, dust, and something else, the heavy sweetness of death. She lay on a cot near the window, a woman no older than her early 30s, dark hair fanned over a sweat-stained pillow, her hands folded as if in prayer. Her face was peaceful, too peaceful. A faded quilt covered her thin frame. It took Jed a second to realize Amelia had arranged it that way. He stepped inside. His boots scraped the dirt floor. Amelia knelt beside the cot, shaking her mother gently. "Mama, wake up. The cowboy came. The good one." Jed knelt next to her, voice low. "Sweetheart, she's gone." Amelia nodded slowly. "I think I knew. But I had to try." Jed said nothing. What could he say? Outside, the sky burned orange as the sun leaned westward. He dug with an old spade behind the house, the ground dry and cruel. Each shovel of dirt fought him. Each clump a reminder of how far gone this woman must have been before help could have reached her. Amelia watched from the shade, clutching a wooden doll with one arm missing. She didn't cry. She just sat there, whispering something to the toy as she picked small purple flowers growing between rocks. When the grave was ready, Jed wrapped the body in the same quilt and carried it outside. She weighed less than a bale of hay. She always wanted to face the sunrise, Amelia said, so she could see the day coming. Jed adjusted the grave's angle. It felt like the least he could do. After they filled it in, Amelia placed the wildflowers at the head and pulled a threadbare ribbon from her hair to tie around a cross Jed had fashioned from fence posts. She bowed her head. Mama always said God sees everything, even from here. Jed stood silent beside her, hat held over his heart. Back in the house, he found a few cooking pots, 2 cracked mugs, a rusted rifle with no bullets, and a silver locket wrapped in cloth. She gave me that, Amelia said it had pictures from before Papa changed. Jed opened it. Inside was a photograph, yellowed and faded. A woman smiling. 2 boys, one older, one younger, stood on either side of a smaller Amelia. The boys looked no older than 8 and 10. My brothers, she said, Tommy and Samuel. Papa took them in the wagon, said they had to earn their keep. Jed's jaw clenched. Your father, Blackjack Morrison? Amelia nodded. He used to be kind. But after the last winter, Mama said something broke inside him. Jed stepped outside, needing air. He thought about leaving, riding off and finding someone else more qualified, but that idea faded as quick as it came. The girl had come to him, trusted him, and when she tugged his coat with her bleeding hand, she hadn't asked for a hero. She'd asked for help. That night, Jed sat outside under the cottonwood while Amelia slept inside on the cot her mother had died on. He stared up at the stars, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the tarnished sheriff's badge he'd kept wrapped in an old piece of his wife's dress. It had no shine left, but it still felt heavy. He held it in his palm, weighing his past, and the child now depending on his future. Tomorrow he'd have to decide what to do, where to go, how to find 2 missing boys, if they were even still alive. But tonight, he would watch over her, and he would listen to the words that still echoed in his mind. Please follow me home. Because that's exactly what he'd done. What he hadn't expected was how much it would feel like someone leading him home, too. The desert didn't weep for the dead. It simply held them in silence. Jed stood knee-deep in the grave he was digging, muscles straining with each shovelful of dry earth. The sun had begun its slow slide down the sky, painting the desert in streaks of fire and copper. Sweat soaked through the back of his shirt, and the ache in his shoulders was familiar, like an old pain that never fully healed. The cottonwood tree offered no real shade, its leaves wilted under months without rain. But it was all this place had. Jed figured the woman Amelia's mother deserved at least that. A tree to sleep beneath. Something rooted. Amelia sat nearby, hugging her knees, chin resting on her arms. She hadn't spoken much since the burial preparations began, only watching with those glassy blue eyes. But as Jed smoothed out the last mound of dirt and placed a simple wooden cross at its head, she finally whispered, She used to sing by that tree. Said if she died, she wanted to be where the wind could still touch her face. Jed pressed his hat to his chest. She's got it now, girl. She's got the wind. Amelia nodded once, then reached into the pocket of her tattered dress. Mama gave me this the day before she stopped talking. It was a silver locket, dented, tarnished at the edges. She held it out with 2 hands as if it were holy. Jed took it carefully. He opened the latch with a soft click. Inside were 2 small photographs. One was a family portrait, Amelia, her mother, and 2 boys with bright eyes and crooked grins. The other was a man, sharp-jawed, dark-bearded, eyes like black stone. Jed's fingers tightened. He knew that face. "Blackjack Morrison," he said aloud, voice like gravel. "Your father." Amelia nodded, barely a whisper. "He wasn't always mean. Mama said he used to laugh. Before the war, before the gold." Jed swallowed hard. His own past rose up like a dust storm. He hadn't spoken that name in years, hadn't dared. Blackjack Morrison wasn't just a criminal. He was the one who destroyed Jed's life. A man who escaped justice by slaughtering a family of witnesses. Jed's family. He looked at Amelia again. She didn't know what her last name meant. Not really. Inside the shack, the shadows had lengthened, curling into corners like old secrets. Jed entered with a slow breath, the boards groaning under his boots. The place reeked of rot, sweat, and something sweeter memories trying to survive in broken wood and sun-faded curtains. He searched with care. Beneath the hearth he found a tin box. Inside, a worn journal, a broken compass, a child's drawing folded a dozen times, and a single bullet wrapped in cloth. He opened the journal. The handwriting was harsh, all caps, as if forced through clenched fists. April 17th. Can't stay long. They saw me. Took the boys. Tommy's fast. Samuel cries too much. But they'll fetch a good price if they're still pretty. The men said east, toward Cedar Bluffs. Didn't want to, but she left me no choice. Jed's hands shook. Fetch a good price? His voice caught in his throat. It wasn't just abandonment. It was trafficking, selling your own blood. He flipped the page. April 19th. Girl's too soft. Can't use her yet. She'll stay with the woman until she dies. The preacher never comes this far. No one will find them. And if they do, let 'em. Let the vultures have the rest. Jed slammed the book shut. His pulse thundered. He stared at the floor, trying to keep his rage from boiling over. Amelia stood in the doorway, watching him. Are my brothers still alive? Jed didn't answer right away. He looked at her. Dirt on her cheeks, scabs on her knees. That same trembling hope he'd seen in war survivors and orphans. He knelt before her, placing the locket gently back in her hand. I don't know, but I'll find out. She clutched it to her chest. I want them back. I want them to come home. Jed exhaled slowly. This was no longer about guilt or penance. It wasn't about avoiding the past. It was the past staring him in the face with blue eyes and a name he could no longer ignore. You sure you trust me, little one? Amelia nodded. You came when no one else did. The sun slipped lower, brushing the sky in purples and rose. That night, Jed sat by the fire he built with old wood from the barn. Amelia slept, wrapped in a blanket beside him. He watched the flames lick the stars, his hand resting near the badge he hadn't worn in 20 years. He thought about Blackjack's journal. He thought about Cedar Bluffs. And then he remembered the last words of the journal's final page, scrawled in a shaking hand. If anyone finds this, don't follow. You won't make it out, Jed leaned back against a post, voice low and bitter. I'm not anyone. And I've already lost everything once. He looked at the sleeping girl, the firelight dancing across her tangled hair. He wouldn't lose again. Tomorrow he'd ride east, but he wouldn't be going alone. And someone out there was going to answer for what they'd done to those children. The moment Jed rode back into Sekiro, it felt like stepping into an old wound that never quite closed. Dust curled in the late-day heat, settling over crooked storefronts and rusted signs. The wind dragged tumbleweeds down Main Street like they were running from something. Folks leaned on porch rails and watched with eyes too quiet to be friendly. No one waved, no one smiled. Just a town too used to pain, too used to pretending it didn't see anything it didn't want to. Jed's horse moved at an easy pace. Amelia sat in front of him, wrapped tight in his coat. Her little hands clung to the saddle horn, knuckles white, jaw set in that strange, brave way that didn't belong on a child. She didn't speak, but Jed felt her tension. "Nearly there," he muttered, steering them toward the back of town where Vicente's cantina waited like a memory that had never left him alone. The cantina door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside it was dark and cool. The scent of mesquite smoke and aged whiskey soaked the air. A few heads turned, some with surprise, others with concern. Then a voice called from behind the bar. "Jed Thornton, either you're a ghost or the devil finally gave you back." Vicente Alvarez stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a faded blue towel. He was lean, weathered, and still walked like the soldier he used to be. Shoulders square, eyes sharp, mustache trimmed to perfection. Jed tipped his hat. "Could say the same for you." Vicente's gaze dropped to the child beside him. His face changed. "This her?" Jed nodded once. "Name's Amelia," he said. "She's Morrison's girl." The cantina fell silent. A glass clinked somewhere in the back, and a card game stopped mid-hand. Vicente's expression didn't change, but he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You got folks talking, amigo." Word spread fast. "Couple of ranch hands say they saw you digging a grave out by the old cottonwoods." "Wasn't hiding it," Jed replied. "Her mama didn't deserve to rot." Vicente looked at Amelia. "She got the same eyes as her brothers. I remember 'em. You knew the boys? Before Morrison disappeared with them, yeah. Good kids, used to trade marbles and peaches for jerky. Now," he let the rest hang. Jed took a breath. "We need Dr. Henderson." Vicente nodded once and gestured toward the back room. Inside, Doc Henderson was hunched over his maps and instruments, surrounded by piles of old newspaper clippings and bounty flyers. The doc was pushing 70, balding, and so thin he looked half-folded into himself. But his mind was sharper than a snake's tooth. Jed laid the journal down on the table. "Need you to read through this." Fast Henderson adjusted his spectacles and flipped the pages. His eyes scanned the scrawl, lips moving silently. Then he stopped. "I've seen this symbol before," he murmured, tapping a rough sketch near the corner of one page. "It ain't just a hideout map. It's a trade route." "Trade for what?" Vicente asked, arms crossed at the door. "Children," the doctor said flatly. "Runaways, orphans, stolen from camps and sold east of the divide. Morrison didn't just vanish, he built something." A ring Jed's jaw locked. "And now he's hunting the only loose end." "Amelia," Vicente turned grim. "3 men rode into town this morning. Asked about a girl with blonde hair. Said they were bounty men, but they looked more like hyenas sniffing blood." "Where are they now?" Jed asked. "Still here." Waiting, Doc Henderson stood. "You need to hand her over to the sheriff, Jed." "It's the lawful thing," Jed didn't answer right away. He looked down at Amelia, who sat quietly by the fireplace with a bowl of stew Vicente's wife had made. She ate slow, carefully, like she was afraid it'd be taken away. "Sheriff Klein is too soft for this," Vicente said. "You know it. He'll follow the law and lose the girl to it." Jed's eyes narrowed. "She gave me a silver locket. Inside's a photo of her brothers. Said she wants me to bring them home." "She's a child," Henderson said. "She shouldn't be your burden." Jed's voice came out low, cold. "She's not a burden." Vicente gave a small nod. "Then you already made your choice." Night fell heavy over Socorro. The wind carried whispers down alleys and over rooftops. Jed stepped outside, leaned against the post, and lit a smoke. He scanned the street. 3 figures stood at the far end, half in shadow, watching the cantina. He didn't need to guess who they were. Behind him, Amelia whispered, "Are they the ones Daddy sent?" Jed turned. "Maybe. I'm scared." He kneeled in front of her, resting a hand on her shoulder. You don't need to be. Not while I'm here. He looked out at the three silhouettes again. If Morrison wanted his daughter, he'd have to come get her himself. But Jed Thornton had buried his own family once. He wasn't about to bury another. The wagon creaked through the arroyo as dawn broke, golden light spilling across the low hills like something sacred. Jed held the reins steady, scanning the desert with an instinct honed in darker times. The morning was quiet, but the kind of quiet that never lasted long. They'd taken the back trails out of Sakuro, steering wide of any known roads or watering holes. Jed knew the land better than most, knew which ridges gave cover, which dry beds turned into ambush points, and how to disappear without leaving so much as a broken twig. Amelia sat beside him on the bench, wrapped in a worn blanket that smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. She hadn't said much since they'd left, just stared out over the scrublands with a faraway look, her small hands tucked beneath her knees. Jed stole a glance at her. "You holding up all right?" She gave a little nod, then shrugged. "My hair's itchy." Jed managed half a smile. "That's because you're overdue for a bath." She made a face, then giggled, and the sound startled him. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. They rode in silence for a while longer until Jed pulled off near an abandoned line shack tucked into a dry creek bed. It had half a roof, a broken-down fence, and a rusted iron stove still bolted to the corner. Good enough for one night. Amelia jumped down and stretched her arms. She looked tiny in the vastness of the desert, like a wildflower growing out of rock. But there was a sturdiness in her, too, something more than just stubborn will. Jed went about unhitching the horses and pulling supplies. When he turned back, he found her crouched near a ring of stones. "You know how to build a fire?" he asked. She looked up and nodded. "Mama taught me." Before she got sick, Jed tossed her a flint box and stepped back. She worked carefully, stacking kindling with more focus than most grown men. She struck twice, then again, and a flicker caught. She leaned in and blew gently until the flames licked up around the twigs. He watched her in silence, heart thudding a little slower. They ate quietly that night, beans, dry cornbread, and a strip of jerky each. Amelia picked at her food, then tilted her head at him. "You ever have a daughter?" she asked softly. Jed froze. He looked into the fire, jaw clenched. "Yeah," he said after a long while. "Her name was Sarah. She was 9, Amelia's voice came out small. What happened? She was taken. A long time ago. In the war, when things got real bad, Amelia didn't say anything for a moment. Then, gently, was she kind like you?" Jed's throat tightened. "I wasn't kind back then," he said. "Not like I should have been." She mulled that over. "Do you think I could have been her friend?" He didn't answer right away. His hand gripped the tin cup too tightly, and the fire cracked in the silence. Then his voice came, rougher than he meant. "Yeah, Amelia. I think she would have liked you a whole lot." The girl smiled softly, her eyes wet but shining. "Then I'm glad I found you." Later that night, after she curled up in the corner under a blanket of canvas and stars, Jed sat outside the shack with his rifle propped beside him. The fire had burned down to coals. He stared at the horizon where the sky met the rocks in a quiet hush of silver and blue, and for the first time in years his shoulders shook. No sound escaped his throat, but his face was wet and his chest hollow. It wasn't just grief this time. It was the feeling of something breaking open, something that had been locked shut since the day Sarah was buried in a grave. He dug himself, her doll clutched to her chest. Inside the shack, Amelia murmured in her sleep. Jed looked back. She was holding the silver locket again, her fingers curled around it like it was a lifeline. He swore quietly to the night sky, no matter what Morrison sent, no matter who they were. He'd protect this girl not just from the men chasing her, but from the past that had taken too much from both of them. But just before sleep claimed him, he saw it. Far in the distance, a flicker of torchlight. Moving. 3 riders, slow and deliberate, and they were headed straight for the shack. Las Cruces rose from the dust like a city that had given up on redemption. It sat crooked in the desert, hemmed in by rusted rail tracks and the blackened timbers of shuttered mines. Jed guided the wagon slowly through the outskirts, keeping his hat low, his eyes scanning every alley and window. Amelia sat beside him, unusually still, her small fingers clutched around the locket at her throat. She hadn't spoken much since they passed the broken sign welcoming them into town. But now, as they rolled past an old stone building with faded paint and a star-shaped carving etched above the door, she tugged Jed's coat. "That was the place," she whispered. "The men brought us there first." Jed stopped the wagon. She slid down and walked over to a weathered post outside the building. Nailed to it was a crumpled flyer, half torn, the ink running from years of sun and rain. She reached out and touched the edge of it. "This was here when they took Tommy and Samuel," she said. "I remember 'cause of the green mark." Jed stepped closer, studying the flyer. It was for a company called El Sol Mining Cooperative, stamped with a faded sun symbol. Nothing about it looked official, but it had enough names listed to suggest something deeper. "You said they split y'all up," he said, crouching down beside her. She nodded. "They said boys are good for work, and girls get quiet faster." Jed's jaw tightened. Amelia didn't flinch. She pointed down a dirt path that veered behind the building. "That way." "That's where they took the boys." "I think they're still here, Uncle Jed." He didn't correct her. Instead, he took her hand and led her back to the wagon. They followed the path past a dried-up well, an old stockyard, and finally into the hills, where the land grew jagged and the sun hung low behind the ridges. It wasn't long before they spotted the remnants of a mining camp, corrugated tin shacks, rusted tools left behind, and a skeletal frame of what used to be a hoist system. Jed dismounted. "Stay here," he said. But Amelia was already halfway to the shack, pointing at a carved symbol in the wood. "That's Tommy's," she said. "He carved a T on everything that belonged to him." "So nobody could take it." Jed followed her gaze. There it was, right above the threshold, worn down but still sharp. A T with a line through it. He pushed the door open, rifle raised. Inside, the air stank of coal and old blood. A thin trail of footprints led to the back, where a trapdoor sat crooked on the floor. He moved quickly, eased it open, and peered down. The space below was narrow, like a storage cellar, except it had been turned into a holding pit. 2 boys lay curled in opposite corners, shackled at the ankles with rusted chain. Jed's voice came hard and low. "Hey, boys. You awake?" One stirred, the older. He looked up with hollow eyes and flinched at the light. "You Tommy?" Jed asked. The boy nodded slowly. "Who sent you?" "Amelia," Jed said. "Your sister." The name hit like thunder. The younger boy sat up, blinking. "Is she safe?" he asked, voice hoarse. "She's waiting outside." Tommy scrambled to his knees. "She's alive?" Jed nodded, already working the chains loose. 10 minutes later, the 2 boys stood unsteady in the open air, blinking like they'd forgotten what sky looked like. Amelia ran to them before Jed could say a word. "Tommy! Sammy!" The reunion was clumsy and tear-soaked. Tommy held her tight while Samuel pressed his cheek against her shoulder, both trembling. Jed stood back, giving them space, the rifle slung across his chest. But something gnawed at him. It had been too easy. No guards, no traps, no signs of fresh struggle. He crouched by the shack again and kicked through the loose floorboards. Beneath a pile of cloth he found it. A wire, freshly cut, still warm. And beside it, a boot print too large to belong to any of the children. He stood, eyes scanning the horizon. Someone had let the boys go. And whoever it was, wanted them followed. Jed couldn't sleep that night. The children lay curled up in the back of the cave they'd taken shelter in, just west of the ridge, hidden beneath the sandstone overhang. Tommy and Samuel clung to Amelia like they'd never let go again. The fire was small, just embers, throwing shadows on the cave walls. But Jed sat apart, one hand on his rifle, the other holding something he hadn't shown the kids. A letter. It had been tucked beneath one of the boys' blankets in the mine. Not hidden well, left on purpose, sealed with red wax, no name, but Jed knew the handwriting before he opened it. Morrison. His hand trembled slightly as he unfolded the note. The words were written in thick, angry ink, smearing where the pen had pressed too hard. Sheriff Jedediah Callan. It took you long enough. The girl was never the prize. She was the bait. You've always been the real catch. You remember 20 years ago when your badge still shined and your eyes still believed in the law? I do. I remember the day you dragged me out in front of my children, called me a monster, and watched them scream while I went to prison for a crime that never stuck. So I took from you. I burned your house down, watched your wife bleed out on the floor, watched your little girl cry for her daddy. But I didn't kill you. Not then. Because I wanted it to simmer. I wanted you to rot like I did. And now, after all these years, I want my children to see what justice looks like. My kind. Come to the canyon. Bring the girl. I'll be waiting. Jed sat there for a long while, the fire dying beside him, until his knuckles were white around the paper. He hadn't worn a badge in nearly 2 decades, hadn't even spoken the word sheriff since Sarah died in his arms. But Morrison had never forgotten. The trap had been set before Amelia was even born. The girl wasn't some random orphan, she was planted. A string on a map leading back to a revenge, long simmered and now boiling over. The sound of movement behind him broke the silence. It was Amelia, barefoot, sleepy-eyed, dragging a blanket. "Why are you still awake?" she asked. Jed quickly folded the letter, slipped it into his coat. "Just thinking," he said. She looked at him for a long beat. "You look sad." He forced a tight smile. "I'm all right, little one." "You don't lie good, Uncle Jed." That pulled a genuine chuckle from him, short and tired. He reached out and tucked her blanket back around her shoulders. "You cold?" She nodded. He let her crawl into the crook of his arm, her head against his ribs. For a few minutes they just listened to the wind curl outside the cave. "You're not going to leave us, are you?" she asked quietly. "Never," he whispered. But in his gut he knew what was coming. By morning the skies turned copper and the children were loaded back into the wagon. Jed planned to head east toward the Pueblo reservation, hoping to find safety in the vast openness before Morrison could catch their trail. They made it halfway through the canyon before Jed's instincts began to buzz. He reined in the horses, eyes narrowing on the rock formations above. Then he saw it, a glint of sunlight off metal. 6 men, spread along the ridges like vultures with rifles, and at the mouth of the canyon, directly ahead, sat a black horse and a man in a dark coat. Morrison. Jed's pulse slowed. Time dropped into a crawl. He reached down, unlatched the hidden rifle under the wagon seat. Behind him, Tommy whispered, "What is it?" Jed didn't turn. "Trouble." Amelia's voice came next, soft but steady. "Is it him?" Jed nodded once. She leaned forward and took his hand. "Then we stay together." He gripped her hand tight, one final breath. And then Morrison raised his hand and the canyon roared to life. The canyon was dead quiet, too quiet. Jed stood alone, his boots pressing into the dust, his eyes locked on the figure ahead. Morrison dismounted slowly, each movement deliberate. His black coat swayed with the wind as he drew a long, curved sword from a scabbard slung across his back. The steel caught the morning sun like a flame. "I could have had them shoot you like a dog," Morrison called out, voice deep and cold. "But I want this done right." One man to another, one father to another. Jed's jaw tightened. "You call yourself a father?" "I raised those children," Morrison said, motioning to the ridge above where Amelia's brothers were hidden under watch. "I fed them, trained them, taught them strength." Jed stepped forward, calm but firm. "You taught them fear." Morrison smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Still think you're a sheriff? Still playing hero to the lost and broken?" He tossed something toward Jed. It landed with a thud in the dirt. A scabbard, and within it, the sword Jed's father once carried during the war, polished, untouched by time. A message. Jed stared down at it. He hadn't drawn that blade in over 20 years. Not since his father's funeral. Not since he swore he'd never raise steel in vengeance again. "You're gonna fight me with that old thing?" Morrison mocked. Jed bent down, picked it up, and slid the sword from its scabbard. The weight was familiar, heavy with history. "I'll fight you with it," he said quietly, "because I still remember what it meant to carry something with honor." Behind him, Amelia shouted, "Uncle Jed, no! Please don't kill him." Jed turned his head just slightly, enough to meet her wide, terrified eyes. "I have to protect you," he whispered. She clutched Tommy and Samuel tightly, their little faces pale as ghosts behind the boulders. Jed turned back toward Morrison and walked into the ring of dust the outlaws had formed around them. Morrison grinned like a wolf, and then they clashed. Steel rang out in sharp bursts, the kind of sound that echoed across dry rock like thunder on bone. Morrison fought like a madman wide swings, brute force, all fury and scars. But Jed fought with precision. Every step was measured, every motion a lesson learned the hard way. He blocked, he struck, he circled. And when Morrison lunged, Jed slid to the side and brought his blade across the outlaw's shoulder. Blood soaked Morrison's coat. Still the man roared and swung wildly, rage blinding him. "You took my life, Callan. You took my children." Jed's voice cracked as he parried again. "You lost them the moment you used them." The next strike knocked Morrison to his knees. Jed raised his sword to end it. "Don't kill him," Amelia screamed again, her voice shrill with desperation. Jed froze, chest heaving, sword trembling. Morrison looked up at him, blood on his teeth, smiling through the pain. "You won't do it," he hissed. "You're still that boy with a badge and a heart that breaks too easy." Jed's hands shook, and that's when Morrison gave the signal 2 short whistles. Gunfire erupted. The ridge lit up as rifles cracked, but something shifted. Instead of the bullets finding Jed, confusion echoed above. A scream, a scuffle. Tommy had picked up a rock and thrown it directly at one of the gunmen. Samuel followed, grabbing a stick and jabbing at the man's knee. Amelia darted forward and threw a satchel of pebbles into a shooter's eyes. They weren't just Morrison's children anymore. They were Jed's now too, and they were fighting for him. Jed turned just in time to see a gunman lift his rifle aimed right at Amelia. No thought, no hesitation. Jed dropped his sword, tackled Morrison, rolled to shield the girl with his own body. A gun went off. The echo cracked the sky, and Jed didn't know if it was his last breath or the start of something new. The shot still echoed in Jed's ears as the dust began to settle. He didn't feel any pain, just the weight of Amelia clutching him, trembling, her face buried against his chest. Jed slowly looked down. No blood, no wound. The bullet hadn't hit him. He turned to where Morrison lay on his side, chest heaving, one arm curled protectively around his ribs. Blood spread across his shirt in a growing stain. Tommy and Samuel ran to him first. Amelia followed. They didn't speak, just collapsed beside their father, tears streaking their dirty cheeks, unsure whether to hold him or let go. Morrison groaned and looked up at Jed, his face pale and sunken, like the fight had drained every lie out of him. "I was wrong," he rasped, eyes flicking between Jed and his children. "All this time I told myself I was making them strong, so they wouldn't end up like their mother." He coughed, a wet rattle in his chest. She was soft. Too kind. I saw it as weakness. But the night she died, she jumped in front of a bullet for them. And I saw the truth." Jed stood silent, his sword still at his side, tip buried in the dirt. Wind swept through the canyon. No more gunmen left standing. They'd either run or surrendered. It was over. Morrison turned to Amelia, his voice just a whisper now. "You have her heart, girl. And that's not a curse. It's a gift." Amelia's lip quivered. "Why didn't you just let us love her?" "Because I thought love made people weak," he said, looking at Jed now. "But you taught them different. Even now, you shielded her." He reached into his coat with trembling fingers and pulled out a crumpled envelope, stained with sweat and blood. "Names, locations, men who followed me, hits they're planning. You can stop it." Jed stepped forward and took the envelope gently. "I'll see to it," he said. "But more than that, I'll raise them better than we ever were." That brought the faintest flicker of peace to Morrison's face. He nodded, barely. Then his eyes glazed over. His chest stopped rising. Amelia let out a soft sob and leaned her head onto his shoulder. Tommy wrapped his arms around her. Samuel wiped his tears, trying to be brave, but his chin shook too. Jed crouched beside them, placing a firm hand on each of their backs. "He's gone," he said softly. "But you're not, and you're not alone." The sun dipped lower behind the canyon wall, casting everything in a golden, burning red, the kind of red that lit up scars and shined through sorrow. Morrison died as he had lived, complicated, defiant, and afraid of his own heart. But his children, they were free now, free to be more than what he feared. Jed stood tall again, his coat fluttering slightly as he looked out over the horizon. The sword in his hand felt lighter now, like it no longer carried just grief, but purpose. Behind him, Samuel tugged at his sleeve. "Where will we go now?" Jed looked down at the boy, then over at Amelia and Tommy. "We're going home," he said, "and this time, no one's gonna take it from you." He didn't see the rider watching from the cliffs, didn't see the glint of a spyglass, or the quiet signal passed along a ridge, because Morrison's list had named names, but it hadn't named the man funding them all, and that man had just been warned. Jedediah Callan was alive and heading back to the place it all began. They rode through the gates just after noon. The prairie wind stirred the tall grass, and the boards on the old ranch house groaned a familiar welcome. Jed reined in his horse and helped Amelia down, then Tommy, then Samuel. The kids stood quiet for a moment, staring up at the place. It wasn't much to look at, weather-beaten siding, a cracked porch step, and a sagging barn, but it was home, and this time it wasn't just Jed's. Amelia reached for Jed's hand. "Is this where we're really staying?" Jed looked down at her and nodded. "Not just staying. Living." The silence broke. Tommy ran toward the barn, whooping and kicking up dust. Samuel followed, already calling dibs on the upstairs room with the wide window. Amelia just stood there a moment longer, then walked toward the porch and sat on the step, her eyes soft but steady. Jed sat beside her. "They're acting like they've always belonged here," she said. Jed smiled. "That's because they do. You do too." The next few weeks passed in a blur of repairs and small miracles. Doc Henderson rode out twice to check on Jed's ribs, but mostly to check on the kids. Each time he brought a fresh pie from his wife and a new story about how proud the town was. And on the third visit, he brought a Bible. Jed met him on the porch. "Figured you might want a new one," Doc said, placing the heavy book in Jed's hands. "No family's really a family in this town without names in the front cover." Inside the courthouse 2 days later, Jed stood beside Amelia, Tommy, and Samuel. Judge Harrington, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair and tired eyes, sat tall behind the bench. "You understand the responsibility you're taking on?" she asked Jed, her tone firm. Jed nodded. "I do. You swear to raise them as your own?" "I swear." Doc Henderson rose from his seat behind them. "I stand witness to this man's character. He didn't just save these kids, he gave them a future." The judge gave a small nod, and something in her expression softened. "Very well. As of this day, you are their legal guardian." The kids didn't fully grasp what that meant until they were back home, and Jed handed each of them a pen. They gathered around the dining table, newly sanded and polished, where the Bible lay open to the family registry page. Jed signed first, Jedediah Callan. Then Amelia, her handwriting careful and slow. Then Tommy, pressing a little too hard, tongue sticking out. Then Samuel, small loops, but proud strokes. They all stared at the page, names inked in fresh black. No blood, no lawman, no threat of losing one another. Just names. Together. That night, laughter echoed through the house. Amelia sang while washing dishes. Tommy and Samuel wrestled on the living room floor until Jed reminded them a cracked rib takes longer than a week to heal. The next morning, Jed woke to the smell of biscuits burning and Amelia shouting something about too much lard. He never thought silence could be replaced so fully. Each child found their own rhythm in the weeks that followed. Amelia took to the kitchen and the garden, keeping order and warmth like a little general with an apron. Tommy was always covered in dust, always fixing something that didn't quite need fixing. Samuel, quieter than the others, spent his time reading, always asking questions Jed sometimes couldn't answer. But he answered with presence, with patience, with trust. And every so often, when the wind came through the canyon just right, Jed would hear something that sounded like his father's voice, or maybe Morrison's last breath. But those ghosts no longer haunted him. They reminded him he'd been given a second chance to build something better. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Amelia handed Jed a letter. "It came from the territory capital," she said. Jed opened it, his brow furrowed as he read. Samuel watched him. "Bad news?" "No," Jed said slowly. "Just unexpected." He held the letter up. It bore the official seal of the governor's office. They wanted Jed Callan to testify in front of a federal panel investigating Morrison's network, a network that, according to the letter, stretched far beyond their small corner of the world, and somewhere in the shadows, someone with more power than Morrison had ever held was watching. The snow came early that year. Not heavy, just a light dusting across the prairie, enough to turn the fences white and lay a soft hush over the hills. It was the kind of snow that seemed to slow time, as if the world was catching its breath. Inside the little house on the edge of the ridge, 4 souls moved with quiet purpose. Amelia was in charge of decorating the cedar tree Jed had chopped down and dragged through the snow, her tiny hands tying red ribbons onto the branches. Tommy had taken to cutting wood with a little too much enthusiasm, trying to prove his strength, but mostly just scattering kindling across the porch. Samuel sat cross-legged in the parlor, flipping through a book of stories so worn it barely held together. And Jed was carving. He sat by the fire, knife in hand, whittling the finishing touches on a small wooden angel. It wasn't fancy, but it was steady, simple, and clean, much like the home they'd built. "Can she go on top?" Amelia asked, peering over his shoulder. Jed smiled. "I think she'd like that." They placed her gently on the tree together, Amelia balancing on a chair, Samuel steadying it with both hands, and Tommy giving unhelpful directions from the couch. The angel leaned just a little to the left, but no one minded. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. That night, the house smelled of cornbread and smoke. The hearth crackled warmly. Jed had cleaned out an old desk drawer and pulled out a small leather-bound journal, the one Catherine had once kept. Most of the pages were blank now, but tucked between them were faded entries and sketches made by her hand, and Sarah's. The kids gathered as he opened it. "I want to share something with y'all," Jed said, voice low. He began to write. Not just names and dates, but stories. He wrote about Catherine's laugh and Sarah's quiet bravery. He wrote about the little things, the way Catherine had insisted on planting lilacs, even when the soil resisted. The way Sarah once tried to teach a stray cat to pray. He wrote not to mourn, but to root the present in the past, so these 3 children would know they weren't building from ashes, but from something sacred. "Are you sad?" Samuel asked. Jed paused. "I was, but now I think I'm just full. Like winter's over, even if the snow's still falling." Tommy looked at the journal. "Can we add our stories, too?" Jed nodded. "That's the whole point." Later that night, while the wind howled gently beyond the frosted windows, they gathered around the fire. Amelia handed out mugs of warm milk. Tommy lit the final lantern. Samuel curled against Jed's shoulder, half asleep. The family Bible sat on the mantel. Beside it, in a small wooden frame, was the journal. The new one. Their own. In the corner drawer, untouched since the night Catherine and Sarah died, lay Jed's old pocket watch. The hands still frozen at 11:47, the moment everything had stopped. He opened it once more, stared at it a long while. Then he shut it gently, slid it back in the drawer, and let it be. Time, he whispered to himself, isn't what stops. It's what you build after outside snowflakes fell soft and steady. Inside, the 4 of them read stories aloud, one voice passing to the next. The fire flickered gold against their faces. For the first time in years, Jed didn't feel like a man haunted. He felt like a man home. And just beyond the glass, past the glow of the lanterns, something stirred in the woods. Not a threat, not a ghost, just a shadow of a future still unwritten, waiting for them to step into it. This was not the end, just the first chapter of something larger. Outlaws may fade, but legacies, they grow, one season at a time. And for those who've been walking the lonely trail, searching for a story worth holding on to, stay close. Because the next tale from Western Legacy is already riding on the horizon. Subscribe now and don't miss what's coming. The West remembers those who choose courage, choose love, and choose to start again.